Good morning and welcome everyone to the third session of the Global Innovative Growth Forum. I am Professor Young-wook Park from the KAIST College of Business, and I'm honored to be chairing the session. Before getting started with the session, let me briefly introduce how the session is organized. First, we will hear from the impressive speakers today, who will each deliver their talks in approximately 15 to 20 minutes, followed by a short discussion which will be led by our discussant today, Professor Chang-Gun Lee. We are privileged today to be hosting a diverse group of world-renowned experts who will share with us wisdom and insights on digital innovative growth. Thank you all for joining us today. The third session addresses the lights and shadow of digital innovative growth in the age of living with COVID-19. As we are all aware, the COVID-19 pandemic has turbocharged the digital transformations of many aspects of our lives and economies, bringing with it so many benefits to societies, including powering new innovative growth models. On the other hand, digital innovative growth is also raising a host of challenges, including governance issues related to emerging technologies, data, and on the future of jobs, etc. This session will share insights on digital innovations and growth from globally renowned experts, many of whom have worked long in the field as leading academics or thought leaders shaping the digital governance agenda at a global stage. The session deep dives into the question of sustainable growth through digital innovation and responsible development through governance mechanisms that mitigates increasing risks posed by the ongoing disruptions across different sectors. Our first speaker today is Professor Michael Cusumano, who is the Sloan Management Review Distinguished Professor and Deputy Dean at the MIT School of Management. Professor Cusumano previously held a joint appointment in the School of Engineering at MIT. He specializes in strategy, product development, and entrepreneurship in computer software, as well as automobiles and consumer electronics. At MIT, he has recently taught platform strategy and entrepreneurship, as well as strategy and the CEO. He has extensive experience working in Asia. In 2016 and 2017, he was on leave as Special Vice President and Dean of Entrepreneurship and Innovation at the Tokyo University of Science, where he founded the Tokyo Entrepreneurship and Innovation Center and designed a new mid-career management of technology curriculum, as well as a new business school that merged the Graduate School of Innovation and the School of Management. Professor Cusumano has published 14 books and more than 120 articles and columns. His latest book is The Business of Platforms: Strategy in the Age of Digital Competition, Innovation, and Power, co-authored with Annabelle Gower and David Yoffe. Professor Cusumano, thank you for joining us today. We are very eager to hear your insights, and you may begin your presentation.
Hey, thank you very much. It's a pleasure to be here and with distinguished panelists as well. Let me share my slides. And again, my hope is to give some insights from the book research that we did, but also some more recent follow-up research. And again, I will explain what we mean by that. So the tension that we've been writing about more recently is between the Wild West economic environment that platforms began in and issues of how to regulate them, or should we expect more self-regulation? So the first point, and I think everyone understands this at this point as well, is that digital platforms, as we now call them, are among the most valuable companies in the world, the first trillion-dollar businesses. And we also see different types of platform business models extremely popular among the private billion-dollar companies, which we call unicorns, and many other startups of small and medium size. So we estimate roughly 60 to 70% of the business plans that we see, myself and my co-authors, are platform ventures of one sort or another. So we really need to understand platforms, and we need to figure out, in some ways, how to rein them in. So in my book with David Yaffe from Harvard Business School and Annabelle Gower from University of Surrey. We really tried to put together research that all three of us have done going back 25 years, even 30 years. And again, we were studying computer software at the very beginning of the internet. And these were really the first platforms. So we've thought about how to understand them and study them more quantitatively as well as qualitatively. So we've broken up all platforms into two types. The first type we call innovation platforms. Annabelle Gower and I published a book in 2002 called Platform Leadership. This was largely about innovation platforms. I published a book in 1995 with Richard Selby called Microsoft Secrets, and that was also about innovation platforms. And that even dated back to mainframes and IBM. So this type of platform is where there is a technology such as a personal computer or a smartphone that serves as a foundation for third-party companies to create their own products and services that complement that platform technology, make it increasingly valuable. So the platform serves as an intermediary to bring together innovators, let's say, and users. And the network effect between those two sides of the market can be extremely powerful. The other type of platform that we began to see in the mid-1990s when the internet emerged, innovation platforms, by the way, we can even trace back to the 1960s and the IBM mainframe. But transaction platforms were, at least in the digital age, more associated with the internet. And these are essentially marketplaces or sharing economy exchanges where the platform brings together buyers and sellers or renters and users. It could also be users and advertisers. So we mix in here marketplaces, social media networks, sharing economy platforms, many different types. But the basic idea is to enable a transaction through the platform. And the business model is to either charge for that transaction or charge advertisers. The most powerful companies in the digital world are really hybrid companies that are doing both types of platforms. They are innovating and they're also finding ways to link buyers and sellers through a transaction mechanism. So this is our basic typology. We also began our book, The Business of Platforms, published in 2019, with a study that was quantitative of the leading platforms in the space of personal computers, internet services, and smartphones. So we started with the Forbes Global 2000 list. We had some criteria for which firms we looked at. We excluded older platforms, and firms had to have at least 20% of their revenues coming from a multi-sided market driven by network effects, which is our definition of a platform market. There were 43 firms in this bucket. I don't have time to go into all the details, but they were relatively similar in size, quite large, about $4.5 billion in sales. We also compared them to 100 companies in the same industries, but that were standalone product or service companies. So we compared platforms to non-platforms. So the platform companies and the control sample had about the same amount of sales, about $4.5 billion a year. But the platforms achieved this with half the number of employees. They had twice the sales growth rates, almost twice the operating profits, and almost 3 times the market values. And again, market values are associated with growth rates and profits, but the small number of employees was quite striking to us, and also the growth rates. Again, they're leveraging networks, they're leveraging assets outside the company rather than owning the assets, like a rental firm or even an innovation platform that relies on innovators creating applications outside the company. So clearly we can understand the economics of these companies, but there's a darker side to what has been going on, particularly in the world of social media. And we trace some of this back to Section 230, the U.S. Communications Decency Act of 1996. And the argument here is that if there are not consequences for the behavior of these firms, whether they are selling counterfeit goods on a marketplace or allowing any type of information, even harmful information, political or health wise information to be distributed on a platform. There's a moral hazard here, but there's also a potential tragedy in the commons in that the internet as a common resource for commerce and exchange of information can be damaged, already has been damaged. So the problem with Section 230, again, this goes back to the early days of the internet. The platforms were declared to be these, let's say, neutral intermediaries. This one quote here: "No provider or user of an interactive computer service shall be treated as the publisher or speaker of any information provided by another information content provider." So the platforms were able to have all sorts of information and even products and services in some cases, and basically say they're not responsible for it. So this law fueled platform growth in early years. It also helped companies like Amazon, for example, and there were other sectoral laws which they also did not have to follow. For example, state taxes in some cases, or labor laws, or insurance. Airbnb, for example, is it a hotel or is it a software app? Or Uber, is it a taxi company or is it a software app? But these lack of consequences have also created problems in our ability to trust the internet and even trust these companies in their different businesses. So we also looked historically at other industries. So clearly, government regulation becomes difficult when technologies are new, especially also when they're complex and evolving quickly. So government regulators don't often have the expertise to understand new technologies and new markets, and things keep changing. Clearly, this was the case with digital platforms. But what we have also seen historically is that when companies have recognized that their bad behavior might actually harm their ability to do business and grow and sell products and services reliably, or if their bad behavior encourages mistrust in these platforms, then we find that they do self-regulate. And there's also a need for some government oversight or pressure or threat of regulation to force that behavior. So we've seen this time and time again. We don't have to go through all the examples, but we went through a few that were related to the content or product issues that we saw with digital platforms. So in a recent article that is just published this year, Annabelle Gower and David Yaffe and myself published this piece. It's a very simple matrix that showing that if the probability of invasive or aggressive regulation from a government authority is high, and the costs of regulation are high to the firm in terms of business impact, then we're going to see platforms fighting. We're going to see, as we've seen with historical companies, they're going to resist regulation, and we're going to have lawsuits, for example. They're going to fight labor laws, for example, or the gig economy, or self-preferencing in search, or bundling issues. And we've seen this historically. However, if government can introduce, or if companies can themselves introduce some type of regulation without destroying the business models of these firms, but there is a threat of government regulation, then we're more likely to see self-regulation emerge, that companies will try to curb the excesses of their operations and create a healthier business and a healthier market and healthier competition. And again, they don't do this out of charity or goodwill. They do it really for self-preservation. So we've seen this in a number of cases, and I can summarize that a little bit more clearly in just a list here. So I've already explained the moral hazard and tragedy of the commons fear that we have, and also the notion that self-regulation is not likely to occur if the costs are too high. But where we've had credible threats of regulation in the United States, we have seen firms step up and regulate their own behavior. Again, sometimes it's taken decades, but for tobacco ads, for example, self-preferencing in airline reservations, social media ads for terrorism or pornography or child abuse. The other observation from history has been that we sometimes see coalitions of firms emerge to regulate their own behavior. By a coalition, I mean a group of firms agreeing to adopt certain practices so that the playing field is level. And so they are not competing unfairly if one regulates and another does that. So we've seen that in movies, video games, again, tobacco and alcohol advertisements, largely for children, and bans on terrorist and child abuse ads. So we do hope in the future that we will see some type of self-regulation from these digital platforms under pressure from the government and possibly some measure of cooperation amongst these firms. Okay, that is the key messages I'd like to convey today. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Professor Cusimano, for sharing your insights. It's wonderful to hear about your research and the thought-provoking insights about digital platforms and regulations, self-regulation, and so forth. I'm sure we will have more questions from the audience, but first, let's hear the presentations from our speakers, and then we will come back to this issue. Our next speaker is Ms. Shayla Warren, who is the Deputy Head of the Center for the Fourth Industrial Revolution, Head of Data, Blockchain, and Digital Assets, and a member of the Executive Committee at the World Economic Forum. Ms. Warren's pioneering policy work is helping shape the data and technology spaces to be more inclusive, equitable, and sustainable. Ms. Warren began her career as a Wall Street attorney at Cravath, Swaine, and Moore before turning to philanthropy and civic technology. She was a senior executive and general counsel at TechSoup, and she also designed and launched NGO Source, a groundbreaking service focused on international grant making. Ms. Warren currently serves on the boards of the ACLU of Northern California, the Equal Justice Society, and TechSoup, and on advisory boards for the World Bank, the OECD, and others. She is also the co-host of the popular show Money Reimagined on the CoinDesk Network. She is an honors graduate of Harvard College and Harvard Law School. Ms. Warren, thank you for joining us today. We are delighted to have you here, and you may begin your presentation.
Thank you, first of all, so much for having me. It's such an honor to be here today with these distinguished panel and distinguished guests. I will also share my screen and go here. I thought that I would run you today through just a quick overview of the frame of the work that we do here at the World Economic Forum on technology policy. And I think I loved the frame of this entire conversation about the light and shadow of innovative growth, because of course, that is exactly correct. And so part of what we focus on here at the forum is how do we create policies, governance, regulation that accelerate the benefits of innovation and mitigate the risks, recognizing that benefits and risks are present in any innovation. And a lot of times we don't have the foresight or ability, regardless of how much we're future planning or scenario planning, to understand, because things are moving in real time, the effects or the potential consequences of some of the work that we're doing, particularly when something is truly innovative as opposed to just disruptive. So as we say, the convergence of technologies here, we tend to look at technologies in isolation. So we say, oh, let's make policy about AI and machine learning, or policy about cryptocurrency, or policy about smart devices, or policies about surveillance, right? But really, it's the convergence of all of these different innovations that is shaping and changing the way that we interact with each other as a society. It's changing the way that governments provide services, changing the way that we think about a corporate structure and a business. It's changing the way we think about our relationships with our families, with our friends, and even how we identify ourselves. As we see things like the metaverse or Web3 or kinds of concepts that are not really common parlance and not really well understood by those outside of technical expertise, it's hard to understand how the ways that we engage with each other are profoundly changing for positive and negative. I think that when Web 2 was being developed, the centralized platform model that Professor Cusimano was talking about during his remarks, it was not really entirely foreseeable the kinds of biases that would be baked into those systems. Now, if we paid attention to other systems, legacy systems, our financial system, the way certain services operate, even telecommunications, we'd have understand that we're almost always creating an insider-outsider problem. We almost always are building technology or innovation in ways that benefit a certain part of society, often at the expense of another part of society. But as the world becomes more and more connected, through the internet and through new forms of innovation and new forms of technology and digital economy, it behooves us to be thinking in a more global way about our policies and to recognize that policies that we might make in one jurisdiction have a spillover effect more than they ever really did before. And nowhere is that more true than when it comes to digital economy. Now, it is my personal belief and the forum's belief that meaningful access to technology can actually provide empowerment and agency for people and communities. And this, I think, is a fundamental premise, but there's a huge caveat on that point. And the caveat is that if we are not mindful and thoughtful about how we actually engage in innovation, if we don't, we're not very careful and cautious about the kinds of opportunities we're providing, the thinking about equity, thinking about accessibility, what we're going to do is ever enhance the divide between what we colloquially call the haves and have-nots, and not just financially. Because I think we talk a lot about global equity and access to wealth. We talk in the United States here where I live about how during the pandemic, we had the very richest parts of members of our society become even more separate from the rest of society, while the bottom 75% of American population lost wealth over the course of this pandemic. The very, very top 0.1% just absolutely cataclysmically enhanced their wealth creation. But it's about more than just access to wealth or hoarding of resources. It's also about access to the ways that enable us to participate in the global economy. We're seeing really interesting new models that are already converting innovations that were for purposes for which they were not intended. An example that I find really interesting is play to earn gaming happening in the Philippines as an example. So the Philippines, historically an economy that was based on a remittance flow, based on a lot of overseas kinds of activity with money coming back through a remittance corridor, is now seeing the opportunity for play to earn gaming to create financial reality, financial wealth and wealth creation within the society without the need for the emotional tax of moving across a border. And that's an example of something that started off as a fun game, but is now proving, at least in the short term, we'll see how this plays out with regulation, proving to actually be a means of actual wealth enhancement and creation that has an impact on society and family life. And so these kinds of things, I think, and encouraging this sort of innovation, encouraging an enabling environment in which technology is deployed in such a way that it can provide empowerment and agency is something that we should be thinking about when we think about how we're creating policy and regulation. Similarly, we have to think about society. So not just individual opportunities or even family or community opportunities for wealth generation or economic opportunity or other opportunity, but also how do we create policy that puts humans and communities at the center? So the forum had a pilot that we're running with the city of Helsinki and the capital of Finland, which is looking at if we take away the concept that we should be starting with a policy and then pushing it out and observing how it happens, but actually generating a policy from the ground up, focusing on the benefit to humans, what would that look like? Now, this is going to sound like a very simple example, but it's quite profound. So what the city did was they noticed that there was not significant uptake on free universal childcare, early childcare in certain parts of the city. So instead of requiring parents or caregivers to go in and enroll their children in these schools, they actually texted them proactively, telling them they were pre-enrolled in the school based on their geolocation or based on their commute patterns or based on their address. And then the parent could go in and change, if they wanted to, that particular location of that school based on their own information and the path that they were maybe commuting on or whatever it might be. But the pre-enrollment alone and the push out of that, rather than requiring a parent to pull down that information, had a profound effect on the uptake. And then the follow-on effect is that the city can then observe where is there more demand for these kinds of services and what other services might be useful to put in those similar places. So if you know that parents are largely going through a certain transit center, maybe that's where the school needs to be. Maybe you think about the traffic flow. Maybe you think about how you're doing your street lights or your transit to make access to that part of the neighborhood more effective or more more easy for parents and families. This can then have climate reduction effects as people are able to take a more efficient path to wherever they need to be during the course of the day. It can result in certain kinds of educational interventions that might be useful in a certain part of town or part of the city. So the simple act of just looking at what people really needed, which was busy, very hectic parents with new children needed to have this kind of done for them, have this service really offered up almost on a silver platter, has led to the development of other kinds of policies or potential creation of policies that have a very profound effect. So Helsinki and now Finland are thinking about how can we embed this approach, this as a design process in the creation of policies of everything from transit to childcare to health services to whatever it might be, voting access and things like this. So the fundamental just shift in frame can have very profound effects that are encourage and incentivize more pro-social behavior and result in more uptake on services that are actually quite appealing, but are just not rolled out in a way that anyone can actually make use of. And then it's important to also understand online harm. So we have a project at the forum we call Pathways to Digital Justice. And this is predicated on the realization that while harm can be identified and online harm is ever increasing, and this is everything from what they call revenge pornography to exploitation, catfishing as a phenomenon, all kinds of different things, or complete identity theft, ransomware, whatever it might be, it is very, very hard to locate within a legal system, most legal systems, where accountability lies. And so we created a project called Pathways to Justice. The idea is that it's probably not a linear path it's not like a situation where you can basically just identify a bad actor or perpetrator, sue them or whatever it might be, or expose them to criminal action or liability or fines, and then stop the harm. And the harm is ongoing, particularly because when it comes to something like the release of private information, it is almost impossible, usually it is impossible, to actually stop that information from spreading in a viral manner all over the internet. So once the harm exists online, you could assume that it really cannot be undone. How do you compensate or make somebody whole in that context? These are the kinds of things we should be thinking about when it comes to legal policies, thinking about our systems, because as more and more people are exposed to online harms, digital harms and data harms with higher and higher frequency at ever and ever younger ages, we as a global society need to think about the accountability we're building into the system and how we are incentivizing the creation of that harm. Right now, it's quite expensive. It's quite lucrative, rather, to be a perpetrator of this kind of harm. How do we flip that narrative? And so we're looking at that kind of as well. So in addition to kind of proactive policies incentivizing social behavior, we have to actually apply meaningful consequences and accountability to antisocial behavior at the same time. And those are often flip sides of the same coin, in line with the concept of the light and shadow of innovative growth. I thought I'd stop my remarks there. We have a lot of other work happening here at the forum. Again, exploring the convergence of technologies, everything from space tech to mobility, to smart devices, to blockchain and crypto. And I look forward to discussing that further on the panel. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Ms. Shayla Warren. This was very insightful about online harm and justice about the digital world. We will see more of these issues as the metaverse world takes off. Our third speaker today is Dr. Daniel Susskind from Oxford University. Dr. Susskind is a fellow in economics and a senior research associate at the Institute for Ethics in AI at Oxford University and a visiting professor at King's College London. He is the co-author of the best-selling book, The Future of the Professions, and the author of A World Without Work, described by the New York Times as required reading for any potential presidential candidate thinking about the economy of the future. Thank you, Dr. Susskind, and all the speakers for such wonderful and insightful presentations. Finally, I'm honored to invite Professor Chang-Gun Lee to lead our discussion with the speakers. Professor Chang-Gun Lee worked at KDI, the Korean Development Institute, as an associate fellow in Yonsei University Mire campus before joining KDI School of Public Policy and Management. He earned a PhD in economics from the University of Michigan in 2015. He is an applied macroeconomist who focuses on industry and firms and the current digital transformation. Professor Lee will provide a brief overview and summary of each speaker's talk and a broad overview of the central overarching themes of the session. Professor Lee, please, the floor is all yours.
Okay, Thank you for the introduction, and thank you all for the great presentations. They were all insightful and interesting, and they're thought-provoking. Uh, the presenters showed us how digitalization can give both opportunities and threats to the individuals, firms, industries, and societies. And even though the title of the session is Light and Shadows of Digitalization, I think we've seen more potential shadows of digitalization. So I think it's a great opportunity to think about what kind of challenges are ahead, and what we should do. And all three presenters talked about the importance of incentives, right? So what can promote firms to form a coalition and try self-regulation, and how we can pursue some common good for the community, and what we can do to cope with the challenge of automation on the labor market. So I think we can use this time to think a little bit more about how we can utilize the force of markets, communities, and smart government policies to achieve some common good and some desirable outcomes. So I think we can start with Professor Guzmano's presentation, because he discussed and provided very good economic account of platform businesses. And so he explored the possibilities of effective regulation. And as we all know, the COVID-19 pandemic showed us that the problem of disinformation and misinformation is quite serious. And platform business, the firms, they tried hard to correct this, and they tried some self-regulation, but obviously there was some excellent force, from the government to correct the misinformation problem. So Professor Guzmano, how do you think that the platform firms coped with the misinformation problem? And what does it show us? What should be the role of government? Is there any possibility for these firms to set up a good coalition so that we can tackle this problem during this COVID-19 pandemic?
Yeah, thank you, Professor Lee. That's a good summary. So we do think that government has to change some of its policies. We don't think, for example, that Section 230 should be appealed. It's important to have some sense that platforms are platforms, they're intermediaries, and not be totally responsible for, let's say, misdeeds on the platform by some actors. But there has to be some level of responsibility that they haven't had this far. We think, for example, that platforms should be held responsible and possibly forced or fined for revenue they earn or advertisements they earn connected to misinformation or disinformation, whether it's political or health related. Senior executives could be held personally responsible, even sued by the government Department of Justice, or even by individuals. At the moment, they are protected from many of those types of suits, at least in many interpretations. So we think that's possible. We do think that, like in the movie industry, companies can possibly set up some kind of set of rules, let's say for moderating political content or harmful content in other ways, like terrorist ads or bans, or create bans of some sort. That would require some cooperation among firms so that we level out the playing field. So we don't think the solution is government only, but government pressure with some more activities from companies themselves to regulate their activities and help their markets. If they don't do this, they will damage their credibility, our belief in content on the internet, and we think it will harm the use of the internet for many different purposes, information as well as commerce.
Okay.
Right? So the combination.
Yeah. Thank you for the answer. And I think we can go a step further into this problem because you gave us a really good explanation of the economics of platform businesses. So that helped us to identify the zone of self-regulation. So what kind of economic ideas should the policymakers have in spotting the timing of regulation and the goal of regulation and the ways of regulation?
Well, for example, all the social media platforms benefit generating billions and billions of dollars from misinformation that gets passed on. And they have introduced over the past year in particular some tags that saying this information is not reliable, for example. But there's a lot of evidence. I have a number of colleagues at MIT studying this, that misinformation circulates far more rapidly and widely than actual news. Spectacular stories go viral very quickly. So there's no clawing back or penalty on those kinds of revenues. And that's what makes it very difficult for these companies to regulate themselves, because when they start putting tags or closing accounts, they depress the network effects that surround this type of content and interaction among users, and then also advertisers or third-party app developers. But there's got to be some economic consequence, otherwise we think these firms will not listen. And one other point here, in the movie industry, it actually turned out good for them to give ratings on movies of R or parental guidance, for example. They created a broader audience rather than have some people mistrust movies or the potential content. There was a rating system that gave some guidance to parents. So we think the coalition of firms coming together, establishing a code of conduct essentially and a rating system improved movies, radio content. We've also seen it in advertising. But again, firms do not do this voluntarily. They have to see that it's in their self-interest. And in other cases, they need to be pressured by government. The threat of more regulation, if it doesn't exist.
Yeah, thank you. So I think we can connect this topic to the second presentation. So this question goes to Ms. Warren. So Professor Cusimano's presentation addressed the problem of technology and platform governance. So I believe that there must be something similar in the area of like the role of digital innovations in communities and society. So what are the some of the emerging suggestions on how governments can navigate the delicate kind of balance between policies to promote digital innovations and the mitigation of risk that these technologies pose to society?
I think that's exactly, you cracked the nut of it. That's exactly the balance that I think everyone needs to strike. And I think it begins with what is the harm you're trying to prevent and being very specific about that. There tends to be this kind of general hand waving, about things, or there tends to be maybe one specific incident happens and that becomes kind of the focal point of all regulations. It's kind of a major talking point. So if you think about, for example, Bitcoin, for example, right? So there's this whole, Bitcoin and, criminals or whatever, for a little while, that was kind of a talking point. So there was this concern around the ability of Bitcoin, criminals to use Bitcoin for illicit activity, and so if you over-index on something like that, then you risk, basically stifling a lot of innovation at the in the process while you're trying to basically mitigate a very specific and particular harm, which may not even necessarily be a widespread harm. So it starts with kind of what is your policy agenda? What is it you're trying to prevent from having happen? And then being, I think, as prescribed as possible about that, recognizing that any policy is going to have a chilling effect. It is a symbiotic relationship between innovation and policy. So policy shapes the direction of travel of any innovation, and you have to be very, very thoughtful about not creating a penumbral effect or too big of a shadow, if you will, from the regulation that's what you're targeting, and actually having that overflow into a lot of other areas. Now, the other thing I think is important to note is that with any innovation, you are always, almost always, let's say, 99% of the time, let's say, definitionally, if you are looking to pre-existing policy and trying to model new forward-thinking policy on current policy, then you're always trying to shove a square peg into a round hole. Because by definition, the thing that is emerging is not yet fully defined, and it wouldn't be interesting if it fits squarely into what came before. So I think that the history of the internet is something that's talked about a lot, how we came to regulate the internet in the United States, what we did and didn't do, and the consequences therefrom, and all of that kind of thing. But the new wave of decentralized systems, again, to go with this example, is not exactly like the internet. It has some significant differences from the internet. And those differences are actually what makes it interesting. And at the same time as those can lead to risk, can lead to enhanced instances of potential bad actors having new ways of exploiting vulnerable populations or people, that can also, on the flip of that, is provide empowerment and agency to those very same individuals. And so I think it's just important to understand that you can't make good regulation quickly. And you can't make it by solely modeling it after what came before.
Okay, and if I have a follow-up question about communications. I mean, when technologies are new, it's hard to regulate and set up policies. It's also difficult to let people know about the potential benefits and risk of new technology. Like when it comes to Bitcoin, like many teenagers and youngsters, they don't even want to know about the technical characteristics of Bitcoin. They're so much interested in the kind of speculation, right? So what should be the role of the government in technological communication with the public? I mean, should they like set a model to, teach or give some lessons to students? What is your opinion on this? Yes.
So I'll take it two ways. So first of all, I think it is important for those who are making policy about a thing to understand the thing. I do not necessarily think it's important, for instance, it's going to be kind of radical and maybe odd to say, but I don't actually think it's that important for users of a thing to fully understand the details of how that thing works. The same way that I am not a mechanic, I do not actually understand, my husband will tell you, a thing about how my car drives on the road, but I know how to drive it. And that is the level of engagement I need to have. What I need to know is how to drive my car safely. And here in the United States, we have certain rules of the road. I know I stop at a traffic light, I buckle my seatbelt, I do certain things that are designed to minimize my risk of engagement with that vehicle. Similarly, with technologies, you may not know exactly how your VR or a VR headset or AR glasses work. Like, what is the signal? Where does it go? What's the data going into it? But you do need to understand how to ensure that when you're in an immersive environment, you're not walking around and falling off a mountain, right? You need to understand the parameters in which you can more safely use that device. Right? So I think that is the role of policy, is not necessarily to get into the deep education with end users about the details of their technology. I think most people who send a text really don't know how that works, or who send an email don't really understand the mechanics behind it, TCP/IP. They don't really get it, but they understand what spam is. They understand what a spam blocker is. They understand maybe how to prevent ads from popping up, or whatever it might be, right? There are these kinds of things. So I think you have to be thoughtful about what is useful in terms of understanding and education. Now, that being said, I also think that a lot of digital economy and the global economy is going to move towards tech-enabled interactions. And so I do think that as a society, putting some sort of premium or whatever it will, or encouragement around education in these topics is potentially important. And that probably depends on where you are and the kind of way you see your economy developing or your role in the global economy. But I do think that encouraging that kind of curiosity is important. And I do think that having that start from the top and having leaders who are in favor of science and technology and speak favorably about science and technology as being something that can be pro-social is quite positive and productive.
Great. I have another follow-up question. I think this can go to Professor Guzmano or Ms. Warren, because in Korea, when COVID-19 came, the government and internet platform providers, they closely work together to provide the right correct information about the pandemic, and also provide some technical foundation for tracking and collecting information from the people. So I believe there could be some good model of how business is involved in promoting like public awareness and improving digital literacy and solving social problems. So probably Professor Kuzman can give us a good example or give us some insights about the possibility, and Ms. Warren can also share her opinion about this.
Okay, thank you. Well, I think you're right that social media sites were critical in relaying information, Facebook, for example, in particular. But initially, they were somewhat slow to recognize and do something about the misinformation that was being circulated. And there still is a lot of misinformation on the web, but they've been trying to curb it. But it takes thousands of people and the kinds of technology that we heard about from Professor Susskind to moderate through this content, and it never works perfectly. But then they also have the economic conflict of interest that all this misinformation and spectacular information generates advertisements and billions of dollars. But we did see some effort to curb the information and present better information. And today you do see much more curbs and accounts removed from people that are spreading misinformation. We also saw Google and Apple as smartphone technology vendors make an alert system possible for users. I have one on my phone, for example. If someone tests positive, that information is relayed to the state government and I get an alert on my phone. But that's only in my state of Massachusetts. We have people that oppose that kind of use of technology more broadly, and so we don't see it broadly. But, and I think in Japan and Korea, the technology of smartphones was used more effectively than in the United States for those kinds of alerts.
Sure, and I'll just chime in to add, we at the forum, we have an initiative called the Data for Common Purpose Initiative, and we're actually privileged to have a fellow from KAIST who's working on this initiative. And I think that what we're trying to point out to this initiative, which has some very concrete, practical elements and outputs, is to basically say that in our rabid quest to preserve privacy, particularly around things like health data, which obviously is very private data, we have a bit thrown the baby out with the bathwater. And so there are instances, and sort of the types that Professor Kismano cites, where people are not only willing, they're eager to share information, provided it's sufficiently encrypted and anonymized and untraceable to them and whatnot, about things like COVID transmission or their particular demographic, so that they can be more understanding by scientists or vaccine developers or whatever it might be around the spread and transmission of this virus, or for other similar related reasons, flu, as well. And in our quest to preserve privacy, we have almost cut off their ability in some cases to share that information, which they might be very willing to do. And so part of what this initiative is focusing on is basically saying, look, it is not so much that I, as a person who generates, as a data subject, someone who generates data, care about who has access to that data. What I really care about is what are they using it for? So I might be very comfortable with even a centralized platform, social media, using my information for purposes that I have approved, provided I understand then where that data goes, or using my data in the aggregate, right, to provide some kind of insight related to a health crisis or whatever it might be, or disaster or situation, or whatever it might be. But that exact same information, I might have absolute negative reaction to a corporation using it to generate a product that they're going to sell back to me, whatever it might be, or even for ads, right? So it's not the information itself, it's really the context in which that information is going to be used, by whom, what for how long, et cetera. And we actually, with new technological innovations, we have the ability to be more precise about what data can go where and how and whatnot. And so we need to kind of anticipate that that is a world that is coming, that there are elements of what we call Web3, these more kind of user-oriented or focused approaches to data and data collection, data usage, that may not ever be fully realized, but we're kind of on a path in that direction, and there are innovations happening. And I think our policy needs to anticipate that that is something that eventually will have more fluidity and flexibility. People will be able to have this kind of targeting as to what is done with their information. And that's not a world that we're in at the moment.
Great. I think now it's time to touch on the last topic, and then I think we can invite some questions from online or offline audience. So, Dr. Susskind, I remember, I read a paper, I think it was published in Journal of Economic Perspective. So it was about the history of work, automation, and the public response. And I remember that the author said that in the times of Industrial Revolution, the real concern was not about losing jobs, but more about work being dehumanized. And you actually touched on this issue out of 3 challenges you mentioned. So what do you think about this kind of hypothesis? That the real problem is not losing our jobs, but more about changing nature of work.
Yes, I think it's a really important observation. Let me just make one broad observation, which is that one of the unhelpful things that we do when we talk about the impact of technology on the labor market is that we often talk in terms of jobs. How many jobs are going to be created? How many jobs are going to be destroyed? But the number of jobs that there are for people to do is not the only margin on which the world of work adjusts to technological change. It's not only the number of jobs that might change, but also the nature of those jobs. Not just the pay either, but also the quality, the status, the flexibility. There are many dimensions in which the quality of a job might run, and dimensions in which technology might have a harmful impact on that work. So I think it's really important to keep in mind that when we're thinking about the impact of technology on work, it's not just the number of jobs, but it's the nature. It's not just the quantity of jobs, but it's the quality. And it goes to this point that you're making. But I do think we tend not to be very good at thinking about the relationship between work and meaning. In my view, I don't think we have a particularly good understanding of the relationship between work and meaning, either the relationship that exists today, which I think is far more ambiguous and far less clear than many people commonly suppose, but also how people's relationships to work have changed over time. You can find people having very different relationships to the work that they do at different moments in history. And one of the things I spend a lot of time doing in that new book, A World Without Work, is trying to interrogate a bit more closely this relationship between work and meaning, because I do think it's very important.
All right. And you also mentioned the impact of growing political power of large corporations. And actually that's resonates with changing perception toward labor union. I mean, young generation is, honestly in Korea, they're becoming more negative about labor union. And I believe that that's associated with the waves of digitization, because it changes the rules of every economic activities. So what do you think the role of labor unions and traditional labor movement in the era of digitalization?
The great American economist J.K. Galbraith had a phrase where he talked about countervailing power. The idea that in an economy you want to, where there are concentrations of power, you want to have countervailing power elsewhere. And it seems to me that in a world where large technology companies are gaining more and more power, whether it's economic power or indeed political power, it is important that workers are able to wield countervailing power in response. And it seems to me that the sorts of trends that you're describing, declining support for unions, particularly among young people, it's problematic in the sense that it suggests that that countervailing power is not there. But it's also, I think, a challenge to those traditional unions, because if we're honest, the way in which many unions work, despite the importance of what they do fundamentally, the problem that they solve, the ways in which they work haven't changed for decades. Unions continue to represent workers and their grievances and seek influence in much the same way they did many decades ago, despite the existence of many technological alternatives. And so I think it's a great challenge to many unions to use technology themselves to make themselves more clearly known as a solution to the problem that many workers currently face. And when I see young people falling out of, when I see young people looking less favorably among unions, it seems to me that that is indicative that these organizations are not seen by young people as solving the sorts of problems that they face in their lives. And I think that is a real shame, because they are precisely the sorts of problems that these workers face.
All right. And lastly, you also said that the pandemic was a period we kind of experimented. We were forced to experiment with new digital technologies. So what should be the takeaways for policymakers? I mean, because it gave us a chance to see what happens if we utilize digital technologies. So what should we learn from this experience, in your opinion?
Yeah. I mean, unfortunately, we're still in this experience. So I think that the stage we're at remains, as we would with any pilot or any experiment, trying to gather as much data and as much evidence as we can on what's currently taking place. So once the pandemic eventually does fade, we're able to make informed and sensible decisions about the future. But I think at the moment, many people aren't seeing this as, many people quite understandably are treading water. They're just trying to get through, just trying to survive, just trying to keep going, rather than seeing this as an opportunity to learn, and when particularly thinking about technology, how we can use technology to work very differently. So one of the things I encourage many business leaders to do is to be gathering as much evidence and experience, as much evidence and insight as they can on what is and what is not working well, talking to one another, talking to clients, talking to employees, trying to get a sense of what is and what is not working. Again, so that once the pandemic eventually fades, we're able to make informed decisions based on the experience of the last 18 to 24 months. I think it's too soon, though, to be drawing any conclusions. As I said, the pandemic is not over yet. We are very much still in evidence gathering mode.
Great. Yeah.
Let me just follow up on that. So, Dr. Suskind, your books are described as required readings for any presidential candidate, according to the New York Times. The vast majority of the voters may have not seen your TED Talk, let alone reading your books. And they all want to hear jobs, jobs, jobs from a presidential candidate. So if there's one advice that you would give to a presidential candidate, what should that candidate say to the general public to reassure that the future of work and still get the support and love from their people?
So just to be clear, you're suggesting that voters.
Is there any advice that you would give a presidential candidate on what he or she should say to the voters about the future of work to reassure them?
Yeah. Well, so I suppose the first thing that any political leader ought to be doing is taking the sorts of problems that I've described seriously. I don't think the challenges of automation and the challenges of technological disruption are problems that loom in the distant future, out of sight, things we don't need to worry about now. I think we can already catch a glimpse of some of this disruption unfolding in particular parts of our lives already today. And it's something to not shy away from. So I think for politicians and for policymakers in general, the most important task is to confront and engage this problem rather than try and kick it into the long policy grass. In terms of voters, I think first be honest about the nature of the challenge, and it is a challenge. But I think also be clear that the challenge that we face for the next 5-10 years or so is not a challenge where there aren't enough jobs for people to do, full stop. As I said at the start, I don't think that's the challenge at all. The challenge is that there is going to be work for people to do, but for various reasons, they're not going to be able to take up that work. And there are various reasons why those mismatches might exist, why people might not be able to do the work that has to be done. But it's so I think that's potentially something encouraging that could be said to voters and to workers worrying about work. The challenge is not that there's not going to be enough jobs. The challenge is how governments can help people into the work that's going to have to be done. And it's up to governments and policymakers to design the sorts of interventions that are going to support workers into those roles.
Thank you very much. We can now open up the floor and get some questions from the audience. So if there's anyone who would like to ask questions directly to our speakers, please feel free to raise your hands. And if there are any questions online, I think we could take some questions via Zoom chat room or the YouTube chat room. Okay. Otherwise, I could ask a common question to all three speakers. So let me start with Dr. Kusumano. So you talked about digital platforms, regulation, and self-regulation. Is there any final advice that you would like to give to any government to promote the innovations that these digital platforms bring to the society, but at the same time mitigate the dark side of these digital platforms, which is the overarching theme of today's session?
Well, I'm not quite sure what to say on that, but it's finding that balance between recognizing the good that these platforms do. They enable commerce or information exchange in a way that was never possible. For example, we're having this conference, right, with people. We're attending from all around the world. We're doing it instantaneously. We're looking at each other. This is sitting on top of a platform, and Zoom is one of the newer communications platforms that's been developed. So obviously, we could have spent the entire session talking about the good things that platforms do. So what we want to do is just understand, identify the excesses, and find ways to, I think, make it in the self-interest of these platforms to curb some of those excesses. But on a broader issue, just getting back to what Daniel has been talking about, every time we've had a technological revolution, we've had people worried about replacing workers. I mean, this goes back 200 years. And also in this century, we've had people worrying about replacing workers. We've had worries about commodification or the dehumanizing of work. And I think each time we've seen a transition period, and we've come out of it in some way. So right now we have tremendous demand for new types of workers, artificial intelligence programmers and software programmers. And that's part of the advice to governments to invest in retraining your workforces or in education that helps move populations and economies towards the more modern world. We're not going to be able to automate everything. If we look at economic or at least labor transfers over years, 90% of labor was involved in agriculture 150 years ago. But today, about 80% of labor force is involved in services of different types. So there are things that probably we won't automate. What are those? Can we train workers to do that? And find meaning in that work. And that's often a personal challenge and not just a technological obstacle. So again, there's a lot of things we need to advise governments on, but also companies, and that's part of the self-regulation, and also educators. And that's a mission for all of us, I think.
Thank you. Education and a forum like this will definitely help that effort. Ms. Warren, let me ask you a slightly different question. So we all know that fairness is a really important concept, but fairness also means different things to different people. So with that in mind, if you were to give one recommendation to the government where the government policymakers are trying to balance the digital innovative growth versus promoting fairness in society, is there any insight or advice that you might give in trying to balance those two concepts?
Well, I would first start by maybe questioning the premise and saying I think that fairness is subjective. It's very hard to think of an objective framework on fair, and I think that anybody who's spent some time in kind of diversity, equity, and inclusion spaces will kind of understand what I mean when I say that. I think that fair and equitable are different concepts, and I would certainly encourage a transition into thinking about equity and accessibility over fundamental just kind of fairness. But if we use more of a colloquial definition of fairness, I think you have to examine, where people are starting from. And so you can't assume a level playing field when you enact any kind of policy. That applies when you think about competition law, for example. Competition law, there's a tendency to bias towards existing companies and kind of create a frame around the ways that they do business, which creates a barrier to new entrants. And so one of the big protests that arises around competition laws or even a monopoly or antitrust is that it tends to just bias in favor of existing organizations at the expense of new entrants to a system, even though fundamentally antitrust is about preventing barriers to competition and barriers to entry that can enable or rather make it harder for monopolies to thrive and flourish. Similarly, I think when it comes to a lens on fairness, recognizing that not everyone is starting in the same place, not every community or every part of society or every individual is starting in the same place. And so it really comes down to what are the goals. If the goals are to provide equal opportunity, well, sometimes that means you have to actually stack a deck a little bit to ensure that there is a little bit more equity in the initiation of whatever the initiative might look like or the innovation that's going to be rolled out might be. At the same time, it may be that that is not the focus, that the end user, the citizen, whatever, the consumer, may not be the focus. It may be more similar to what I was talking about in terms of a corporate leveling, right? So then you have to take a lens a little bit more that looks at monopolies and other kinds of systems that we have deemed as a society, at least in certain societies, not to be pro-social or productive. So then you have to kind of take a little bit of a different boost. And so then there's the question around, well, do you create incentives? Greening of energy or clean energy or electric vehicles or subsidies or credits or whatever it might be, tax breaks. Those are things and levers that the United States political infrastructure has used at times to promote or spur innovation in certain sectors using certain kinds of resources that may be otherwise too expensive to actually enter into the ordinary business calculations. But with the subsidy, they become more equitable or fair or level or whatever it might be. So I would say these are complicated questions, but as usual, it always begins with what is the problem you're trying to solve? What is the harm you're trying to prevent or address? And if you don't have a very clear picture of what that is, then it is not only impossible to develop a concept of what fairness or equity really means in that context, it is literally impossible to regulate in favor of it.
Thank you very much for your insight. All right. Dr. Susskind, so you touched upon the topic about slowly but surely technology, AI, robotics will create more jobs, and there will be a number of jobs existing in the society. However, in the short run, there might be a lot of people who don't match those new skills, so they may have to be sometimes laid off, sometimes be educated to fit the new jobs. But at least in the short run, there might be some short-term pain for a certain population of the workforce. So from that perspective, is there any advice that you could give to the government on how we should deal with this population who no longer has the skill set that matches this new digital age, or maybe even to the firms that may have to lay them off?
Yeah. Well, this tends to be the conversation about automation, which is how do we provide the people that you're talking about with the skills and with the capabilities to do the work that has to be done. And that's partly thinking through what we teach, what sorts of skills and capabilities. It's partly thinking through how we teach. The ways in which we teach people haven't really changed much for decades, despite the existence of many technological alternatives. And it's also about when we teach. Very strong cultural presumption in most societies that education is the sort of thing you do at the start of your life. That's when you spend the time, the effort, the resources building up your so-called human capital, and then you don't need to worry too much about it again. And I think that's where a lot of the debate is. It's about how we ought to engage with the what, the how, and the when of educating and retraining workers for the jobs that have to be done. I suppose, though, I think the picture is a little more complex. I mean, the reasons that people are unable to get the work that has to be done aren't really just about skills. It's not just about skills mismatch. I think there are also, just more prosaically, place mismatches, that people happen to not live in the sort of geographical location where work is being created. I think that's very important, particularly for certain types of blue-collar role, which are very dependent upon thriving demand in particular physical spaces. But I also think there are issues around identity mismatch, that people have a particular conception of themselves and they're willing to stay unemployed in order to protect that identity. South Korea is a very interesting example. Incredibly high proportion of the unemployed have college degrees. Now, the reason those people are unemployed is not because there isn't work for them to do. It's because the work that is available isn't the sort of work that they feel that they were preparing in life to do. Those are mismatches that aren't so much about skills or even about place. They're about identity. And I think those sorts of mismatches are very important. So I think there are limits to education in responding to the challenge of automation. There are limits to that traditional conversation that we have about, okay, well, we just need some more education. And if we get the education right, then that will solve the problem. I think that will get us a lot of the way, but I think there are other problems at play here too as well.
Thank you very much. That's very insightful about the geolocation, the skill set, and the identity of these people who are in the workforce. Do we have any questions from the floor? Okay. Professor Lee, would you like to have a final comment?
No, the only thing I can say is that I really enjoyed this session and I learned pretty much from all speakers. And thank you for inviting me.
Thank you. I have certainly learned a lot. It was very insightful. So thank you to all the speakers for joining us today. And thank you to all the viewers who are joining us online and watching us via Zoom. Now I'll hand over to the conference moderator for the next steps of the forum.
Thank you very much, Professor Beck and Professor Lee, to be kindly present here to host the session number 3.
Good morning, everybody. This is Marco Marinucci. I'm the founder and CEO of Amanda Bridge. We are based out of Silicon Valley, in fact, San Francisco, actually at our innovation center. I'm glad to be discussing about topics that we're very passionate about, in particular, the future and the current macro trends of startups, in particular dealing with the world of clean tech and the macro trends that we can witness from our point of view. A couple of words about what we do for a living. We're an innovation advisory firm based here in San Francisco, but with very international background and views and presence. We manage and we filter solutions in particular for governments and corporates among the world of more mature startups, and we do that at scale. Some of the activity and the numbers that I'll be presenting are actually based out of a presentation that we did not too long ago in cooperation with our partners here at Crunchbase. This is a report about the state of development of the economy of innovation and startups, in particular with a focus in Silicon Valley. The one thing that we see that very clear from our research is that the economy of innovations is definitely growing at a very fast pace. There's not just a single hub around the world, and that what makes this new movement more and more interesting as it's becoming more and more global. From the point of view of the throughput, though, and of the outcome of this economy of innovation, is still Silicon Valley is still top of the different regions that can be compared. So if you see here in some of the data in the background of what I'm showing, the number of scale-ups have been produced every year by Silicon Valley. This is back to the last couple of months, is still significant compared to the rest of the other ecosystems around the world, and not just the number of entities. This is the second line, companies, scale-ups that have raised more than $1 billion. So it's not just unicorns, but entities that have physically raised more than $1 billion, as well as the number of companies that have raised more than $100 billion is becoming significant, and you can still see how that compares. Silicon Valley compares to the rest of the world. And in particular, if we are looking at the amount of startup produced by the population, so in comparison to the size of the population, Silicon Valley is still probably an order of magnitude larger than everybody else, as well as the ability of fundraising. So the amount of money being fundraised and being dedicated to startups based on the GDP of the region. So you can see actually Silicon Valley GDP is really concentrated into the world of startups. But that's just to, as a overall look of how the growth of startups in the last few years has impacted most of the economies. This is just from the last few months. The amount of IPOs that have brought a technology company public has definitely increased, has boomed. Here, if you see in some of the data how just in the last 10 years that has evolved, in particular 2021, and this is still partial, so it's missing the last couple of months of the year. You can see both in size and in number of deals, a number of new IPOs, really the concentration that has happened in the last year. So again, if we compare to look at count the number of unicorns, that is the number of companies that are still private, but that have a private evaluation of at least $1 billion. Look at what happened in the last few months, in the last few quarters. And again, this is just up to August and compared to just last year. So we're really looking at an environment where the world of innovation and the world of startups is becoming more and more central to all the different economies. Just compared to a year ago, if you can see here the number of startups that have become a unicorn. In red, you can see the data for 2020. In black, you can see the data up until October of 2021. It's significant the accelerated growth that the number of unicorns have experienced across the world. So it's definitely a global phenomenon. The other global phenomenon that is that we are seeing from our perspective is really the interesting growth of the climate tech. So as a particular area, a subject matter where venture capital has been lately concentrated on, you can see here in this slide the amount of capital being fully deployed today in the world of climate tech and green tech out of three main hubs, US for the majority, as well as China. and with some important push from Europe as well. This is definitely a trend that is growing. You can see here also in percent the amount of deals that have been closed and negotiated in the world of climate tech. This is definitely something that is driven not just by the passion of the young innovators, but is also to some extent contextualized by the support of government and government policies. In Europe, probably one of the first large group of economies that have started pushing through the Green Deal a couple of years ago, the European Commission, and this is starting slowly to produce an amount of innovation that is coming grassroots. So the investment is just one element of that movement. The other one that will be seen pretty quickly is the amount of startups that will be generated along the same lines. Lastly, this is, I think, another very important topic that we're seeing experimenting in the market. This is pretty new, and it is now going under the title of the Great Resignation. So 2021 will be remembered potentially as the year where a vast amount of employees have decided to take their future with their hands and have expressed the interest of resigning from the current job. So those are sort of late statistics coming from a couple of weeks ago. 40% of the global workforce is ready to quit now. How many of those will be actually quitting is still to be decided, but this is a shortage of employees that we can actually experience on a daily basis, at least here in Silicon Valley. The main reason for that is that people want to do two things. They want to get control of their time, and they also want to do things that matter to them. And those are two elements that are making a movement of a workflow of talent more and more towards two things. One is the potential of becoming entrepreneurs, in particular in countries where entrepreneurship is one of the major potential growth path for young talent, and not necessarily young. But a second part is also to move into what is called the impact investing directly with proper capital, but also with proper resources. And that, I think, is turning into a global opportunity. We're seeing more and more cross-border business relationships that are being built, and we see this as a macro trend that will be accelerating. And it is something that is not just specific to a nation or to a geography, but it's something that has global proportions. And this flow, this great resignation is accelerating a path that was already ongoing. And on that one, we do believe that entities as Born to Global are really in a position to create these opportunities at the very international level, the potential of putting together entities that have maybe a similar path, but growing from very different geographies. We do believe that this is going to shape the next big wave of business opportunity. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Marinucci, for your wonderful speech, elaborating on how Silicon Valley is an epicenter of the innovation and its growth, and the IPO boom that's happened recently, and unicorns and their exit strategy. And we'll now move on to the startup partnership pairs. We'll start off with Mr. Yoon Suk, co-founder and CEO of CER, who has partnered up with Mr. Andres Aranda Martinez, CEO of American Climate Solutions, to tackle the CO2 emission issues in the Latin American region, mainly focusing on the burning of Briquin. And please welcome Mr. Lee to the stage.
Thank you. Thank you very much for the opportunity. very pleased to be on the stage today to explain a little bit more about what InnoCSR is doing together with ACS in Mexico. As you can see, we're in the brick business, and we are today going to show you a little bit about eco-friendly, non-fired bricks that we're going to manufacture in Mexico. Pictures speak a lot more than the words in terms of the problems that the brick kilns are causing globally. Mainly burning coals, and especially in Latin America, trees, and whatsoever that you can find in the community to generate the heat. And this causes not only the CO2 air pollution, but black carbon, SOx, NOx, various different kinds of PMs that are hurting the climate at the moment very severely. And as you can see, it also involves migrant workers, social issues, on child labor issues, and women inequality issues as well. We're partnering with American Climate Solutions, and as you can see, our Mexico partner, led by Andres Aranda Martinez, has been performing in Mexico, Paraguay, and Colombia, and they're very well connected to the brick kilns in Mexico. Whereas my company, InnoCSR, we were founded in 2013 in Korea, and we operate mainly in South Asia. We have our operative positions in Nepal, Indonesia, Cambodia, Myanmar, but going to Pakistan, Bangladesh, and etc. Our expected effect of the joint venture is rapid growth and rapid expansion with the technology from my company, as well as the market from the ACS. A little bit more explanation from my part in terms of the technology that we are in charge of. The Good Brick system, which composes of soil, cement, and soil stabilizer, forms a non-fired bricks. The composition goes through a hydraulic brick press machine, and it produces a very fine-shaped, very strong bricks that are able to be used for 50+ years. We're eco-friendly because we don't burn. There's a lot higher productivity, and we're labor-friendly. And in Mexico, which ACS will explain much more later, there are 20,000 brick kilns producing 6 billion bricks per year. Environmental impact. This is a very, very hot topic that everybody is talking about these days. Because we do not burn, if we are able to convert the brick kilns that are firing into our Good Brick system, each manufacturing site is expected to reduce about 3,000 to 4,000 tons of CO2 per year. There's more than 300,000 sites globally. And in Nepal, where we're concentrating at the moment, there's 1,600 brick kilns. This means by 2025, if we hit our target, then we will be reducing more than 1 million tons of CO2 in South Asia, but also in Latin America with ACS, more than 1 million tons of CO2 per year. Good Brick system increases productivity significantly, meaning that we shorten the production time from normally 28 days to 5 days. This is cutting 80% of the production time. Also, we manufacture indoors, so we're not bound by any kind of weather restrictions or time restrictions. So this expands the productivity of the brick manufacturers, which means more revenue, more sales for these guys. So they have actually nothing to lose, but only to gain. Good Brick system requires less manpower. Right now, a lot of them are migrant workers who have all gone back to their hometown, and getting together 200, 300 people post-pandemic season is not really possible. So we're also tackling on that issue. Good Brick system definitely meets the international standard of the bricks, delivering more than 8 megapascal. As you can see on the bottom right corner, on the left is a fire brick, and on the right is a Good Bricks from the same company that have transitioned. Mexico brick industry, as you can see, as I mentioned, there's more than 20,000 brick kilns in Mexico alone, producing 6 billion bricks per year. This means, but compared with Nepal, where we're operating heavily, there's 1,600 kilns in Nepal, but they're also producing 6 billion bricks. This means that in Mexico, there are a lot of small artisanal producers of bricks that needs to be developed much more. So thanks to ACS, we'll be partnering with the government of Mexico, the municipal government of Guadalajara, and all that. Now, let me pass my baton to our partner, Andres, from ACS, and he will be explaining a little bit more about our project in Mexico.
Thank you, Sam. Thank you, all of you. I'm going to share my screen, if it's possible to have the control. Yes, I have. Okay. Thank you all. Greetings from Mexico and Guadalajara. As Sam tell before, we born about an important issue. That is, this is the pollution of the brick kilns. When I met Sam, we get together for one reason, in order to reduce the pollutants here in the metropolitan area of Guadalajara. And Sam and his product is an option to reduce this kind of pollutants. In this order, ACS has worked before with another institution in the international cooperation order, in order to have an equity market to establish a regular market of bricks products. In this sense, we have already a lot of partners. One of them is the German collaboration, the German cooperation, so the JZ and the GRB, also the government of the state of Jalisco, and the other institution like a climate and the clean air coalition. So in this sense, we try to establish a new kind of technology. We're trying to make a transition between the actual brick producers in order to have more opportunities to have a better condition of labor and a better quality of their products. So this joint venture will hire sales staff and technical teams to sell new technology, and the root brick system will be assessed with priority in this project using proven experience in other countries in South Asia. This is the actual bricks kilns in Mexico. Brick kilns in Mexico, especially in Guadalajara. In Guadalajara, despite to his growth, we have this kind of products, and this product is the base of the pyramid of the construction. And now, as I tell you before, we have a new alias in Mexico. These alias have a good opportunity to have this transition in the market. Right now, I can share with you the overview that where we stand now. We have starting a pilot project in order to use the product of InnoCSR. And this is the render of the project. We are starting to have the technology. We have now capacity in building the brick production in Mexico, especially in Guadalajara. And right now we're trying to bring the non-fry bricks technology. We have already selected the machines. We have already made the proofs with the solid fire that InnoCSR provide us, and now we are contemplate the use of renewable energy in this kind of new processes. So this is a big challenge in Mexico, because right now most of the 80% of the bricks comes to the artisanal way from the artisanal producer that they, as some tell us before, they generate a lot of social and environment problems. And for that reason, it's a little bit challenger to transit in this kind of new products. So in this order of ideas, we try and we hope to start a production, the first production in 2022, sorry. And as every project, we have challenges of the transition. The challenges now is how we can promote a new transition of the bricks producers. So in these ideas, we started with a few persons to conform a cooperative. This cooperative are right now under a capacity building in cooperatives issues, and now with the governments, we are already promote the permits to promote the technology, the production next year. And then we have another challenge transition, the site where we stand with the producers right now. They have energy technical issues, so we are exploring now the energy technical transition option to feasibility benefits to arrange the connectivity energy in order to connect to the production. Another challenge that we note is the new market creation. This new market is different than the others because we are facing with the social and environment problems. But for that reason, we created this association with the government and international cooperation. And the other challenges of this transition is the sustainable finance model, where this kind of brick producers, they don't have already access to sustainable model. And for that reason, we arranged the finance issues in order to get the other financial credit that we need to start to operate. Right now we have a seed finance to start next year. And like a little bit overview that where we are, Guadalajara is at a little bit north of Mexico. This is the city, and this is ironic that one of the most important cities of Mexico, we have a lot of this kind of products. So I don't know if you can share us what is the model in order to replicate, to scale this model.
Sure.
Yeah.
So our team, when we were doing business in South Asia, and we're still doing it, we have successfully manualized the whole process. And we have a team of geoengineers, chemical engineers, mechanical engineers, and civil engineers that are putting efforts all together into this. So this manual is going to Latin America and Mexico, to the city of Guadalajara. And OCSR team will fully support the joint venture and with the technology to ACS team. And we believe that the manualized model is very much replicable, and we can easily scale up, and it is very, very sustainable. We're also backed up by the Asia Development Bank in OCSR itself. And the reason I have this slide up on a World Bank conference is because I wanted to emphasize that we need to hold hands together. We're getting also a lot of interest from other MDBs, namely IDB, namely GCF, and other intergovernmental organizations as well as the government of Mexico and other governments in Latin America. We need to hold hands for this together because we have the solution and it has been proven, and this needs to be solved together with the industry. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Lee and Mr. Martinez. I guess these two business ventures could be called as a real team, as they showed a perfect example of an effective partnership. Hopefully, CSR and ACS could further expand their business venture together. And now our next startup pair is Mr. Park Tae-jin, manager at Vernect, and David Alva, co-founder and COO of Proximity. Together, they are aiming to create a complete solution to tackle the many safety issues within the high-risk industry areas with their AR and VR solution. So now, Mr. Park, please go ahead with your presentation.
Let me just quickly share my screen. Right. Now, thank you very much for a nice introduction. And I would like to start off by expressing a sincere gratitude towards the Ministry of Economy and Finance and IDB team for having me here today. So for today's talk, I would like to talk about who we are and what amazing values we create here at Vernect, and how these values are being shared with our business partner in Peru, Proximity. And David Alba, the co-founder of Proximity, will talk about his plans on execution of delivering our values to local mining industry. Right. Going to turn this full screen in? Yeah. So, moving forward, what is Vernect? Vernect engineers disruptive XR technology to add values across the value chain of industrial enterprises. Since the inaugural year 2016, we have been tripling our sales revenue, and hence we are known as the industrial XR leader in South Korea. As of this year, we are seeking to go global. So this is Vernect's product suite. Vernect Remote is multi-location collaboration solution. We got Vernect Make and View, knowledge transferring tools. These products are going to be shared to the mining industry in Peru, but at the earlier stage of our project, we will be focusing on Vernect Remote. The advantage of these products are that these products are compatible with various smart devices, including Microsoft's HoloLens 2, 360-degree neckband, drones, and even a robot. So we've got these amazing XR-powered products, and what problems are we resolving? Firstly, difficulty in knowledge acquisition. Second, inefficiency in communication. So in an era of digital age, the amount of data being produced daily in these mining sites are enormous. And hence, these on-site technicians ironically, have difficulty in retrieving these data when they need it, and moreover, converting these data into knowledge. So hence, we've got knowledge transferring tools, Vernect Make and View. With Vernect Make, anyone can create immersive XR content without needing to write a single line of code. You can think of this as like a 3D version of PowerPoint. Once the XR content is created, it works across the various realities, including VR glasses, mixed reality, and augmented reality for on-site workers to intuitively understand the required information. Vernect Remote is multi-location collaboration solution that connects frontline workers with remote experts. It leverages various IT functionalities and features, such as translation features, so that the users can translate up to 10 different languages. So our solutions have been overcoming industrial challenges in most safely, efficiently, and conveniently in South Korea. So we have these amazing products that's working very well in South Korea, and that's been recognized by conglomerates like Samsung, Hyundai, and LG in South Korea. And we wondered, why not share these amazing values with the rest of the world? And thanks to IDB Lab, we've been matched with Proximity, VR solution provider. And the main objectives of our partnership and for this IDB Lab project is, firstly, bridging the digital gap through the technological innovation for the mining industry in Peruvian market. Second objective is to increasing the competency of a startup in developed country by sharing know-hows of a startup from South Korea to build inclusive digital economy. Sorry. So how do we go about achieving our goals? These are the value propositions. Our Vernect remote solution is applicable in maintenance, inspection, and training areas. So for instance, for maintenance, currently the mining equipment vendors, when they sell products to their customers, they send over field engineers to perform calibration. And it normally costs them $5,000. For this case, it was between Argentina to Peru. Now, even this isn't a viable option because due to COVID-19, so they perform remote calibration using uncomfortable mobile phones. Now, they can use hands-free Vernect remote telepresence tool to get the jobs done much faster, effectively, and cost efficiently. Another applicable area is in inspection. Unfortunately, many of these upper management from these mining industry were let go due to COVID-19. So they lack human resources and they cannot go travel and check upon the progress of the project in person. So they currently use 360-degree cameras to take still images. Now, they can use 360 degrees neckband to perform live streaming in remote sites to check upon the progress of the projects. Another use case is in training. The Peruvian legislature allowed to issue remote training certificates. Now, these mining companies are leveraging this and they are creating e-learning content. Most of these contents are written in texts, and it's not easy to understand text. So they can now use Vernect remote solution to take video records of first point videos, and hence increasing the quality of e-learning content, and hence increasing the knowledge retention. Now, these value propositions are being introduced to our mining industries, and these mining customers, the feedbacks are that these value propositions are innovative and it's perfect fitting to their needs. And I think it's because that David, our partner, and I have been really paying close attention to analyzing the value chains of the customers. Now, when we look at the conventional value chain, it starts from inbound logistics to outbound and whatnot. Now, when we look very closely to mining companies' value chain, it really starts from exploration stage where these field engineers try to find where the ores are underneath the ground, and then the value chain moves to mining these ores, and then turning these ores into different kinds of metals. And then the value chain moves to various transportational channels. Now, when we look at our value chain, Vernect and Proximity, the XR solution providers value chain, we start from designing of the functionality and IT features. And we develop these IT features and then deploy our systems to customer server or the cloud server. Now, in order to truly create a value that matters for the customers, we have to place ourselves into customers' shoes. And only then we can create a true value that customers values. So as a business developer's job, my job is to intertwining Vernect's and Proximity's value chain with the customer's value chain. And I believe this will create a sustainable value innovation in Peruvian mining industry. So our goal, well, we are hoping that to achieve the following outcomes. First, increasing the technological adoption to reduce the skill gap within the mining industrial workers, digitally transform these mining industry sites, and hence increase the sustainability and hopefully increase the Peruvian GDP and export, since Peruvian government heavily relies on mining industry. Now, that will be all for my presentation, and thank you for listening. I will now hand over to David Alva, who will be talking about his plans on execution of the local market development. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Jin, and thank you all event organizers on behalf of the proximity team for the opportunity to highlight our global partnership with Bernict. Go on.
So thank you very much, Mr. Park, for your presentation. It's certainly happy to see that the promising venture and businesses going out in the world. And now, as Mr. Park have said, Mr. Alva, now the floor is yours, so please go ahead with your presentation.
Thank you very much. I got a head start right there. So my name is David Alva. I'm the co-founder and the CMO of Proximity. And in my part of the presentation, I would like to give a brief introduction into what we do at Proximity, as well as share some more details into the context, the goals, and the first steps around the execution of our joint project. I'll be asking to please help me with passing the slide. So please, let's go to the next slide. Okay, so first, at Proximity, we define ourselves as an end-to-end immersive training platform. We're using virtual reality to deliver better and safer training for the workforce, and we aim to improve and ultimately transform how traditional training model is used in most industries, which is one that's based currently on a mix of easy to deploy but ineffective classroom training, and that's mixed with dynamic but inefficient field training. And we aim to replace this with the ultimately much better, efficient, and effective immersive training. Next slide, please. So through immersive virtual training, what can we do? We can basically improve knowledge retention rates and worker confidence compared to traditional learning methods, while also delivering 4 times faster training and 0 risks for workers. In simple terms, we deliver better training at lower cost. And we've also measured the results of our own solutions in the market with customers such as MMG and Poderosa, both very big mining operations in Peru that have managed to reduce by over 90% the amount of failing evaluations in certain safety tasks, as well as completely replaced physical presence-based field training with our immersive training solution. So we have very real results on the impact right there. Next slide, please. So to deliver this value, what are we doing? We're basically integrating the necessary components needed for an organization to deploy this type of training at scale, going beyond what is commonly seen in the space as pilot projects. So what are these components? Basically, it's content, platform, and certification. I'll be going a brief overview of each one of these. Firstly, content based on a catalog of VR and 360 modules for safety training and onboarding, platform for streamlined development, deployment, and management, and certification delivered through partnerships with local institutions. Next slide, please. So in terms of our content, we include various modules and scenarios for a variety of high-risk procedures, common in industries like mining, energy, and construction. Next slide. And our platform offers data and performance tracking, allow our trainers to view various metrics such as critical mistakes, accidents, time, and passing grades. Next slide, please. And also delivering this with multi-platform support for different devices. That way we ensure that our content is available and accessible to all types of organizations and different types of users of different levels of technological skill and accessibility. Next slide, please. So after going around this brief introduction to Proximity, I'd like to go over the context in which Proximity and Bernict are delivering value through their collaboration. Since Proximity is based in Peru, we're targeting the local mining industry, which is ideal for our proof of concept project. This industry is currently responsible for over 10% of the country's GDP, as well as 60% of its exports, making an ideal opportunity for growth and impact. First, for this, what are some of the existing industry inefficiencies we're currently seeing? For example, field training is, as I mentioned before, time-consuming and risky. This means that workers, in most cases, are required to travel to specialized off-site locations for training. On the other side, we have also inspection operations, as Jin mentioned earlier in his presentation, which requires deploying supervisors from HQ to remote sites in order to gain operational visibility. And both of these operations are done basically through traditional methods, which are expensive and time-intensive. Now, what COVID-19 has done is basically accentuate the inefficiencies of both procedures. Field training, for example, has been, in most cases in Peru, altogether suspended due to safety and health restrictions and regulations. And transportation of workers for inspection and for maintenance is no longer accessible and even viable under these types of COVID restrictions and safety practices. Next slide, please. So after outlining and overviewing through our experience in this industry, some of the challenges we had, we took upon it to define our core value proposition in order to address these issues. Now, what we've quickly found is that companies don't view this necessarily as a training problem or an inspection problem. They basically view this as an operational problem, which has been accentuated by COVID. And the solution for them is not a VR solution or an AR or XR solution. It's basically an integrated digital transformation approach. They view us not as a VR or AR company, but as one that offers solutions to technology. For this, Proximity as an immersive learning through VR provider, and Vernic using industrial telepresence through augmented and XR technologies, we found that our packaged solutions approach would offer, basically in simple terms, increased safety, effectiveness, and skills, helping companies reduce costs and increase safety for workers. And with this in the practice is basically eliminates the need for workers to transport themselves to off-site locations for training and operational procedures like inspection and maintenance, particularly in the COVID-19 context. Next slide, please. So what are some of the core and practical goals we had for the project? Basically, we outlined 3 impact-based goals we set out to deliver. First, it is to deliver training and upskilling for over 1,200 high-risk workers in the mining industry through our immersive learning solution. We also aim to improve safety and efficiency for 6 large-scale mining operations through remote training and operation solution delivered through Vernic. And finally, to establish this project as a successful use case, which will help us expand our partnership into other countries, such as Canada and Chile, and also Mexico, where Proximity is beginning to initiate operations. Next slide, please. Now, what are some of the additional steps we're taking towards execution of this project? We're still at very much the early stage, but we've outlined 3 core stages of this project, basically validating our value proposition. We do this through Proximity's industry knowledge first, also by consulting through mining experts and validating with existing customer base that Proximity has already worked with. This, as Jin mentioned earlier in his presentation, has yielded the feedback that our current proposal for solutions through XR technologies basically is very much fit to solve some of the issues these companies have in training and inspection, which is why we're focusing on those core procedures. After that, we're currently in the stage of preparing product and resources. Why product? Because this means that we need to ready our product, for example, Vernic's remote solution, to some of the challenges and core features of the Peruvian market, such as localization for the Spanish language. This also means in this stage to prepare all types of marketing assets, procure demo hardware for all of our meetings with potential customers, as well as product testing internally for us to currently understand what are the specific strengths of our core products, particularly Vernic learning about Proximity's products and Proximity learning about Vernic's products. And after that, finally, going into the implementation of pilot stage, where we're leveraging our leads from our current customer and partner network delivering on a digital marketing campaign and measuring results and impact in order to sustain this use case and take this POC to other countries like Canada and Chile and Mexico. Next slide, please. So we found an opportunity in the short term where Proximity and Vernic could meet. That was in AWE 2021, the industry's most important XR event. We took this opportunity to showcase both products and use cases at a global scale and also get feedback. Also tried out Proximity Vernic's remote solution and get first-hand training, which we will need later for demos for potential customers. And finally, after months of working on the planning stage of the project, having the opportunity for both teams to meet after all this planning through Zoom after various months. Next slide, please. So these are some pictures we took at the conference. We got some excellent feedback on our product, and I think it was a good opportunity for Vernic to also view firsthand how our training modules offer a much more powerful, efficient, and effective method for learning through immersive and interactive simulations. Next slide, please. We also got to do some product testing. Vernic got to try out our immersive learning solution, as well as Proximity trying out Vernic's remote solution, which, as I mentioned earlier, is going to be needed for all our implementation and demo stages in the project. Next slide, please. And in regards to digital marketing assets, I mentioned that we're currently at an early stage of the project, but we've been able to already create some assets that will help us create a pipeline for these potential customers in the mining industry, such as a web landing page and some one-pagers and assets such as brochures. Next slide, please. And in terms of software localization, Vernic's done a wonderful job in quickly customizing their whole software suite of remote to the Spanish language, and also some of the translation features that will be used by workers in mining operations. So this was already a great head start. And next slide, please. And to wrap things up, basically, what are some of the next steps that we're looking to? Like I mentioned, it's leveraging some of Proximity's customer base. Some of these customers represent a large part of Peru's GDP. For example, MMG is one of Proximity's customers, and they themselves represent 1% of the Peruvian GDP. So impact in just one of these or two of these companies is already generating value for important actors in this space, as well as their whole customer and worker base. After that, we also aim to deploy traditional digital marketing strategies. This means the digital marketing campaign through our landing page, as well as having a presence in some of the world's main main mining conferences, such as Expomina and Benumin, which are both held in Peru. And finally, driving this success will help us provide a path for expansion to partnership in Canada, Chile, and Mexico, where Proximity is already beginning operations, and where this POC will help us basically replicate the strategy of success, which we are looking to achieve, to other countries in the region. Next slide, please. And that would be all for my part of the presentation. Again, thank you very much for having us at Proximity for this overview of the project. Thank you to our partners at Vernic. And we are definitely continuing to work on our goal to deliver impact to more workers in the mining space through integrated XR solutions. Thanks.
Thank you, Mr. Alva, for your presentation. We know for the fact that a lot of military forces around the world is utilizing their latest tech for unmanned operation for the safety of the soldier and its efficiency. And I guess a high-risk industry is just as dangerous as the military operation, and hopefully this sort of collaboration and smart partnership could promote the safety and the efficiency, and always exciting to see these kind of operation and partnership working together. And thank you to all 4 startups for showcasing your brilliant partnerships to tackle the many social issues within the Latin American region. And it is now time for the panel discussion session, where 4 experts in the startup ecosystem from different entities will come together to discuss how the ecosystem is adapting to the digital transformation and green growth. And for this, it's my great pleasure to introduce the session's moderator, Mr. Kim Jong-gap, the Chief Executive Director for Born to Global Center. So please join me in welcoming Mr. Kim Jong-gap to the stage.
Finally, we have a last session. Welcome to join the last session. And today, we have a very great and fantastic, partner and friend from all over the world, which can dedicate the ecosystem building and evangelize, entrepreneurship or startup innovation process. From all the way from the Mexico, which is a LATAM area, and Egypt, which can cover the Africa, and Singapore, which can talk about the Southeast Asia market current situation. And also we invite the United States from San Francisco. And then we will talk about how the COVID-19 impact the startup ecosystem, and what's the post Corona-19, what will be the changing we can expect it. We want to discuss about that. And add on that, we'll talk about how the global collaboration between startup ecosystem to ecosystem. That's what I want to discuss today. And the first, I want to introduce today's panelist. First is Rogelio Cuevas, the CEO of Central, which is Mexico City located. And he's, I think, the main player which can promoting, accelerating the startup ecosystem in the LATAM area. And they are working with the Google also, and they are operating lots of the program to enhance and promoting the scale up of the startup in the LATAM area. And Iman Wabi, the general partner of the Grow in Africa Fund. She is in charging as a general partner of Grow in Africa Fund, which is a high growth impact fund that invests in all the stage after product market fit at the local market, and try to expand their business in the all Africa region. She was a main role to evangelize the startup ecosystem in the Africa area. And also, she has been working with the World Bank over 10 years, and she was charging in the Egypt World Bank program with about $2 billion project. So I think that she can talk about very, for us, unknown area of the African startup. What's the situation right now? And also we invite we have the Alan Kwan Su, which is a general partner of KK Fund of Singapore, and he's in charging as a founder and the general partner. He's in charging the international the strategy and operation of the fund, and he really evangelize and really dedicate to the collaboration between nation to nation startup together, and he really willing to invest that kinds of cross-border operation investment. And then the last, we have Klaus Baum Wihag, the CEO of the 10X Innovation Lab, which is located in San Francisco. And he's kind of the salad style of the evangelist and accelerator. People he joined set up the 10X Innovation Lab. He was the head of the international relationship of the Silicon Valley Forum. This is a very heritage and very influential, the forum, non-profit organization like a community forum. And when I was in the San Francisco, I was so many times attended the forum, and I learned entrepreneurship and what's the innovation and what's the collaboration. And he will talk about today different angle of the the global cross-border business of that. So this is 4 people. It's a great people joined today panelists, and we'll talk about more detail. What's the situation right now, and what will be the next stage of the startup area. So I'm gonna start in the Mexico first. So I'm gonna asking the Rogelio Cobes. You are the Central is Ponto Global's main partner of the Deep Tech Exchange Program, which is driven by the IDB. And today we have 2 presentations to showing up what's the result out about the joint venture initiative. And do you think this Deep Tech Exchange Program can help under the COVID-19 for the startups?
Hi, thank you very much for the invitation. I'm very honored to be here with you in the panel. Yes, actually, we partnered with Born to Global and with IDB to establish these partnerships between startups from Latin America and startups from South Korea to try to develop some solutions and some partnerships that can help provide solutions for the post-pandemic world in LATAM. As you probably know, Latin America has been one of the regions that has been hit the hardest because of the pandemic. So we are really looking forward to having this end. But in the meantime, these partnerships are developing really interesting solutions to what's going to happen afterwards. It is important mentioning that the projects are long-term. We are still at the beginning of each of them. So we're developing still, the technology, the go-to-market strategies. But since we share many, Latin America is similar in every specific market, there may be like great potential for them, for the solutions to scale. But it's still going to be like a long-term project. And yeah, we're expecting to see great solutions from mining, education, different sectors that can help Latin America come out of the pandemic.
Okay. Then what about not only the pandemic situation, but we talk about today a lot of the digital transformation and the green growth or green transformation. Is a cross-border international collaboration between startup to startup? Do you think it can help the more accelerate the digital transformation and the green transformation?
Yeah, potentially. And your point is very right. Actually, Latin America is like a huge region. Unfortunately, we're not really taking care of our resources. We've been blessed with unlimited resources. You wouldn't believe. It's a very rich region. But we're seeing distress in many parts of Latin America, from the Amazons, the Patagonia, even Mexico, all over the place. And unfortunately, this is not the best time in terms of having the right political alignment between the different countries that constitute Latin America. So even though we do share some challenges regionally, it is being very difficult to address them politically, because like the countries are addressing climate change and also the pandemic situation very on a case by case. So there is really not like an integrated solution to these problems. So and this is an interesting point, because we say nature hates the void. So this is actually a good opportunity for startups and for the startup ecosystem to develop interesting ideas and solutions to help tackle those challenges. So I think on the bright side, there may be some interesting opportunities for startups from Latin America and also for startups from overseas that can come and help us tackle those challenges.
Okay. Can you a little bit more explanation of what's the issue for example, green growth area as a foreign startup to enter the LATAM market. What kind of the typical issue to solve the green problem on the LATAM market?
Well, one of the main ones, and in this particular topic, of course, there are some differences between the regions. But one of the main points is, of course, energy. Latin America is a region that still needs to grow much more rapidly, and we need to develop new sources of energy to basically reach that growth on a sustainable way. So, for example, Mexico is a much more industrialized country, so we need to have like that energy for some of the different industrial clusters that we have in the country, so that we can be more competitive against China to supply goods to the US, to the North American market, our main partners, the US and Canada. In the case of Brazil and some of the other big players, the cases are similar. Energy is one big challenge. And then, of course, in terms of agriculture, how we do it in a more sustainable way. As you probably know, the Amazon is basically decreasing by the day. So there's huge challenges to find new ways to exploit the land in a sustainable way and to help people develop, basically. So those two are very, very important.
Thank you for sharing that. My last question on that. To solve the digital transformation and the green growth issue, what kinds of the government activity involved in that to solve the problem from the LATAM?
Well, unfortunately, as I mentioned previously, there is not much government involvement at this point, and they are actually acting separately. So, for example, in the case of Mexico, we know that at some point we will need to move to more sustainable fuels and sustainable energy. But while all of this is happening, and we know that we will need to supply electric vehicles to the North American market, while all of this is happening, we're also building a new refinery, even though oil is declining very rapidly in Mexico. So it's one of those tricky situations. And it's happening the same thing all over the place. It's happening the same in Argentina, in Brazil, and I'm mentioning those because those are the biggest markets. But it's been challenging, and there is again no real structure, no public policies that are unifying the region, and even country by country, the government is very behind in all of this.
That means in the private sector, more opportunity to jumping in and solving the existing problem, right?
That's correct. And we're hopeful that the private sector will have the right incentives to do so, because even in some countries, the governments are deterring some of the incentives for private investors to come and basically start investing in our economies. That is the case in Mexico, where the government is trying to take control back of the energy sector, and then going back to all fossil fuels instead of going to more green sources of energy. So it's gonna take a while, and I think it's probably gonna take unfortunately, a tough warning from nature that we have to act on solving those problems and create the right incentives to move faster.
Thank you for saying that.
Thank you very much.
And I have another question for the Iman Wabi. By the way, what time is the Cairo?
It's 4 a.m. over here.
I'm so sorry that too early morning. Thank you for joining too early morning. I wanted to asking you to introduce your company first, and the general situation of the startup ecosystem in Africa. I want to hear about that.
Absolutely. Thank you so much for the kind invitation. Let me start by sharing actually what we're trying to do at our fund. So it's an impact fund that we're trying to and we're helping companies to expand beyond their borders, because in some cases you find a business that's it's up and running and doing very well in one country, and their solution or their product is actually needed in across the continent. The good thing about the African market, we're talking about 1.2 billion people in the African continent, and this is projected to increase into 1.7 billion by 2030. You have a rising middle class, you have urban population, lots of demand on new services and products. And the great thing is that the continent already managed to leapfrog in several sectors. So, for instance, if we talked about the traditional banking, now we see fintech is doing great, mobile banking is doing great. So we hope that we see the same happening in other sectors, like leapfrogging the fossil fuel growth. Korea is a global leader when it comes to digital transformation, when it comes to artificial intelligence and green growth. So we see a lot of potential for collaboration, of course, in these sectors.
Okay. And what's the situation in the Corona-19? Are there the same situation in other country, or some specific different situation in Africa as a startup ecosystem?
Well, in actually COVID is a kind it's disrupted the ecosystem and motivated entrepreneurs to disrupt many industries. If we see, for instance, EdTech, it has been doing great since the start of COVID. Entrepreneurs rose up to the challenge and actually developed several solutions to help school children who are staying at home and to continue with the remote learning in different ways. We've seen the AR coming also into the EdTech revolution in Africa, and it's happening across, for instance, e-mobility. We see this happening and it's growing. Clean energy, I'm glad to see we're very much similar with Latin America. So with clean energy, again, entrepreneurs, they developed certain solutions to help address this challenge, because although Africa it's the region that contributes the least to the greenhouse gases, it's very much impacted by climate change, and many of the African countries actually rely on hydropower to generate their electricity. So clean energy is a very important sector for us, and it's we see more developments. And I think with COVID and the importance of the reliability of electricity, of course, this takes us to another sector, which is industrialization and manufacturing. This is a huge opportunities. This is a very important sector over here that's presents vast investment opportunities as well.
Yeah. And another curiosity of the African startup ecosystem is there many kinds of the private sector player, like investment venture capitalist or accelerator or sort of the thing, or what's the relationship between the public sector and the private sector of the Africa startup ecosystem?
Absolutely. We have lots of players when it comes to venture capital. You have also the the different DFIs, the development financial institutions of the major governments. We have the French, the American active. We have many global players over here. We have lots of private sector activity as well, because the one opportunity that's very important also to mention is that African countries started to adopt the African Continental Free Trade Agreement, which means that if you are operating in one country, you can access the rest of the 52 countries without the usual custom duties, and you have access to the rest of the markets. This is very important because if you're speaking about the continent is very rich when it comes to raw materials and mining. Country like the DRC, the Democratic Republic of Congo, they are very rich with the needed materials for semiconductors, for batteries, so for EV batteries. So it's very rich continent in that regard. So you have private players looking at the continent, some of them operating, and we hope to see actually more players from Korea in the continent, whether it's a private sector. For instance, in Rwanda, Korea Telecom is very active over there. We hope to see more VCs investing in the continent, and also we hope to see more startups realizing the potential of the different sectors over here. You have huge market opportunity for them to grow and to scale up their solutions and their products across the continent.
Yeah. So thank you for sharing on that. And my last question is not question. Can you give us advice if how we approached the African startup ecosystem to work with that? Is there any certain your advice point to giving us to share?
Absolutely. So one thing it would start with looking at the competitive advantage of the Korean startups and the key sectors they excel in at, and then we start, to look at the countries where their solution, where their product would be very much needed, and then we would love, of course, to see more investments coming from Korea to help them scale up their solution, their product, and also it's not just this is entirely about the collaboration. You work with young entrepreneurs in Africa. You build the skills, the human capital of the African youth. It's about really. In Africa, they love, of course, the Korean dramas and music, but they would love to see you on the ground over here, working with them and collaborating across the various sectors. It's extending more of the soft power of Korea, of course.
Thank you, and I wish we will see more oftenly next year. And then I want to talk with Mr. Alan, the general partner of the KK Fund. He's in charge of Southeast Asia market, and I know that you travel a lot, different country by country, to finding out the good technology and the good company. So what's can you tell us what's the situation under the Corona-19 situation as a startup ecosystem in Southeast Asia market?
Sure. First of all, thank you very much for the invitation to be with an esteemed panel. I have to say that Born to Global is our very, very good partner in Korea, as was shared for us, KK Fund. We are headquartered in Singapore. We invest throughout Southeast Asia, and we have been working on establishing relationship for not just startups, but also investors, corporates, and governments between Korea and Southeast Asia. We are very excited about what we're seeing developing in Southeast Asia and what can be applied to the greater market. In terms of your question, what is happening on the ground in Southeast Asia as it relates to COVID? I think every country is facing their specific set of challenges. For example, in Singapore, where I am based, we went through different phases where we had, let's say, less than 50 cases a day to all of a sudden 3,000 cases a day, and now it's normalizing a little bit. And also it fluctuated between opening up the borders to other countries within Southeast Asia or beyond, as well as having more stricter travel controls. And as many of you may know, Singapore's economy is very much required in terms of working with many of the different countries, not just in Southeast Asia, but beyond, for example, with Korea. For example, a VC like myself, before COVID, we used to have to travel almost every week to each of the countries in Southeast Asia, whether it's deal sourcing or collaborating with our partners or talking to governments. That was the norm of life, not just for VCs, but also for startups as well in the region. For example, a Singapore startup cannot only be successful in Singapore. The market, unfortunately, is quite limited, but they have to expand to other countries within Southeast Asia. So I think, yes, 2020, I would say that all the activities have unfortunately come to a halt, as many of us investors were more worried and concerned about our existing portfolio companies. But I'm very glad to share that in 2021, things are very much looking very bright in Southeast Asia. And in fact, in Southeast Asia, in this year alone, 19 that is, 19 new unicorns has been created in Southeast Asia in just 2021, out of a total of 35 unicorns in the whole Southeast Asia region. So you can see the amount of optimism. There are a lot of activities happening. So yes, as Mr. Kim shared, we do travel quite often between Korea and Southeast Asia, and we would encourage not just startups from Korea, but even startups from other regions to visit Southeast Asia and to explore collaboration opportunities.
Okay. And I'm very curious about what will be your investment strategy after Corona-19? Is it the same as, or it can be changing differently?
Yes, so I would not say that it has shifted 180 degrees, but as with startups, people pivot here and there, make adjustments, and so are investors looking at Southeast Asia regions. We are adjusting our investment approach, our investment philosophy as well. So, for example, let's say give a example in terms of deal sourcing and due diligence. Now, Southeast Asian VCs are having to rely a lot more on referral checks, character references, etc., rather than doing everything on Zoom. As many of us would probably know, it is very difficult to be able to have a full sense of the startup if you just do due diligence over Zoom. So that has certainly changed. It also, given that shift, it has led to a higher concentration of capital to fewer startups because, if, for example, a startup is well known in the ecosystem, there is a natural tendency for VCs to all want to invest and be involved with that one startup. So we're seeing a higher concentration of capital, but I think that also because this year is the first time in Southeast Asia that there is a local IPO story of a local unicorn. So this is a story of Bukalapak, which IPO'd earlier this year on the Indonesian Stock Exchange. So we're starting to see reasonable size exits in Southeast Asia, in the local market, and not having to rely on, an exchange in the U.S., let's say NASDAQ, or NYSE or even Hong Kong Exchange for the exit. So I think that really gives a boost of confidence to many investors, saying that yes, the previous let's say, worry about the whole Southeast Asia ecosystem is the lack of exits. But now, Southeast Asia has proven that we can facilitate our own exit in our local market. And so that is also fueling a surge in interest from global investors. And more recently, last week, there was a SPAC listing by Southeast Asia's biggest startup company, Grab. They listed on NASDAQ. And again, that also gives another boost to investor confidence. So we're seeing a lot more confidence in investing into the region, a lot more confidence in terms of realizing exits. So this is a really good time for investors as well, for startups as well, to examine the Southeast Asia ecosystem and perhaps include Southeast Asia as part of your roadmap going forward.
Okay. And the other question I have is recently so many people talk about the green issue. And I think the Southeast Asia market also has a huge challenging to solve the green issue. Do you think, I believe that the not only the digital transformation, but the green transformation can help to solving the challenging or issue. Is there any way to global collaboration between the startup to to overcome or solving that kinds of a huge challenge of the green issue in South Asia market, and what kinds of challenging do you see at the Southeast Asia market on that?
Sure. Thank you for the question. This is a very important topic in Southeast Asia. Yes, I shared about the successes of unicorns, but unfortunately, none of that is still addressing to me, the most long-term critical issue facing Southeast Asia, which is in terms of sustainability and also for the environment. I think if any of you visit Southeast Asia, it would be great to see a very green environment. Yes, that is true for certain parts, but also unfortunately not so true for the rest of Southeast Asia. And what Temasek, Microsoft, and also Bain Consulting Company earlier this year, and I'm going to quote from them, they have together identified a US $2 trillion investment opportunity in green and sustainable solutions in Southeast Asia alone. $2 trillion. So we're not talking about B, we're getting into the $1 trillion range. And that goes on to show just how important and how critical the issue of being green, being sustainable is for the region of Southeast Asia. In terms of the investment sectors that I personally see would garner a lot of interest. Renewable energy, of course, because Southeast Asia, we are still quite dependent on fossil fuel. Also, many countries in Southeast Asia are providers of fossil fuel. So that will certainly take a multiple collaboration between not just the private sector, but also with public sectors as well. Who are within Southeast Asia and also globally. So we see that renewable energy as a huge opportunity for investment. Green buildings, for example, that's another, and construction. Real estate, as you also probably know, is a big component of GDP in Southeast Asia. And so how to turn that sector into more green with sustainable construction methods, for example. Green data, that's also one topic that is starting to come up. How to utilize data to, whether it's education to the actual construction of buildings and projects, how do you incorporate green into the entire life cycle of this? This is pretty important. The other one being logistics and transportation. As you probably know, that logistics remains to be a challenge in Southeast Asia. Again, for those of you who have traveled, you just need to try to get on a taxi and travel around the cities in Southeast Asia, and being stuck in traffic, you'll see exactly what I mean by that. So how do you incorporate not just electric vehicle, that is only one part of the solution, but a more green and sustainable way to run the entire transportation grid? That is of critical importance as well in many countries and cities in Southeast Asia. Last but not least, agriculture and food. This is a huge issue, and I think especially demonstrated during COVID last year. And just to share, Singapore, for example, is highly reliant on imports of many fruits, vegetables, meats, etc. So as you can imagine, when COVID impacts logistics and impacts the delivery of food, it's not only a question of producing food sustainably, but also how do you ensure that food gets distributed in a green and sustainable way throughout Southeast Asia. So these, I would say, are the main topics that I personally see having huge opportunity for investments and also for collaboration between investors, between corporates or MNCs and the government sector.
Thank you. And today we have two pair of the company's presentation which can collaborate in the solving some problem. What's your opinion? Do you like that, and do you want to invest on that?
Right. Obviously, I will need to do a lot more due diligence to get to know the team and for the team to know us. But yes, I would say that we as KK Fund, we are very, very excited about investments in this space, and we certainly welcome not just startups from Korea, but startups from all over the world who are interested in solving such issues in Southeast Asia. KK Fund, currently, we collaborate with Born2Global and many other Korean institutions to help the startups land in Southeast Asia, because it could sometimes be quite challenging for startups who have perhaps never traveled to Southeast Asia to all of a sudden say, okay, yes, there is an opportunity, and yes, I want to go, but I have no idea how. So that's where KK Fund comes in. Not only will we help these startups learn about Southeast Asia, but also introduce them to potential collaboration partners in the form of local companies and or MNCs with operations in Southeast Asia, but also as provider of capital, we will consider investing into them and helping them set up operations in Southeast Asia and connecting them to partners here as well. So again, I welcome all the startups who are interested in solving these problems. Thank you.
Thank you, and I hope these kinds of company can apply not only the Latin market but the other region also the same solution, and then maybe they can scale up very quickly, and we can change the world, I think. Lastly, thank you for joining the Klaus. And I know that you are global accelerator at the Silicon Valley, and you're working with a different country. So what's your opinion under the COVID-19? All your related countries are doing well as a startup ecosystem viewpoint, or some struggle?
I guess I just want to throw in a comment here in terms of Africa. I see that there are a lot of exciting stuff happening in that region, and also seeing a lot of Silicon Valley-based companies looking to expand into the region. For example, Zipline, which is a Silicon Valley-funded company that raised around $250 million. They actually picked Rwanda as an initial market to scale in, basically delivering medical supplies to people. So I hope to see these things much more in the future, where we see companies from even mature innovation ecosystems like Silicon Valley looking to establish their presence initially in emerging markets, because they see that they can solve a problem there that may be bigger than in their perceived home market. And in terms of collaboration between ecosystems, Born to Global, you, Jungkap, you are a great facilitator of collaboration between different countries. And so just want to plug in, obviously, our future collaboration in terms of helping us to essentially commercialize our new book, Global Class, which is essentially a book on how to build a global organization. So we have done a lot of research in terms of what's changing now in the marketplace when it comes to building organizations. And one of the very, very interesting things when it comes to organizational development is that we're actually seeing around 82% of executives looking at granting decision authority to the edges of the organization. So we're going to see much more fragmented organizations, distributed organizations in the very future, which will be interesting to see how that's going to impact ecosystems as well. You know, to the point of Google and Facebook and so forth, they have very centralized structures in Silicon Valley. You know, how will they look like in the future? Will they be much more distributed? Will they move a bit away from Silicon Valley and tap into emerging markets for top-tier talent and so forth? I'm a big believer that the pandemic has certainly changed the game a bit and certainly have pushed business to a new world, if you will. So it's going to be very, very, very interesting to see how the digital economy is going to look like in the future.
Mm. And I know that you are working with the different countries' government also.
Right.
Can you share how the government, involvement as a startup ecosystem promotion and the building, and then how they help to solve the digital transformation and the green transformation problem? Is that certain your opinion or have at that?
I mean, I believe government is sometimes, what's the word, underappreciated when it comes to facilitation of business and supporting entrepreneurs and startups. I guess I'm from Denmark originally. I didn't say that earlier, but when you see Denmark, for example, they're very strong in renewable energy, but also what they have, the private sector has a strong backing of the government, really helping them to expand their business globally, provide subsidies, facilitate business interactions. For example, right now, Dubai and Denmark are establishing a lot, very, very big partnerships around the green economy and renewable energies and so forth. And so I believe government can come in with that muscle, especially also when it comes to, when you work government to government, policy matters a lot, right? So how do you enable things through policy development and helping it to be easier to set up businesses in foreign markets, and essentially help really make those needed and very strategic connections into what oftentimes are very, very hard economies to tap into from a cultural perspective and so forth, right? So when you work alongside the government, you typically get a lot of respect. So an entrepreneur going to Dubai on a mission all of a sudden gets the respect, in that market because they're associated with very respected organizations.
Yeah. And also how's the personal opinion today's presentation, the company? Do you have any advice to them?
I think I unfortunately didn't hear a lot of the presentations, but I think what I often see with entrepreneurs and startups, at least when they expand, is they often assume that the business model they developed in their initial market can be applied elsewhere. And so they often forget to sort of bring in that customer development mindset in terms of getting insight from customers and then adapt the business, because that's very much needed. But to the point of the book that we're writing, what happens also when you expand and build a global organization, you also add a lot of complexity. So how do you balance localization and complexity is a very, very difficult challenge. And a lot of companies are struggling with that. But at the in particular around having the right mindset when you go into new markets is what I see being very much a challenge for many companies, even Silicon Valley-based companies. They think they can just go to international markets, just apply the model as is. To the point of Walmart in the 90s, they just came in with the Walmart model, and then they had greeters in the front door in Germany, and the German people freaked out, right? So you need to be culturally sensitive and also understand the regulatory aspects as you develop a business in new international markets.
Yeah, add on that, following your answer, Actually, one of the today's speakers, he mentioned about place mismatching, yeah, not the human skills mismatching. I think while we're doing the joint venture initiative, this is a very right terms. So many places they don't know each other, and they try to focusing on their domain or domestic area solution with the relevant resource. So when you work with together with the central, we almost the sourcing like around the 200 company and the matchmaking process, and now the result is fantastic because they found out different sector and a different area, different region solution, but apply on their problem solving. So recently I heard about you talk about international entrepreneurship. It's a very interesting the terms to define not only the entrepreneurship, but based on that global business, global collaboration. We need another aspect of the requirement to do that business. Can you share that idea on that?
Yeah, sure. I mean, just as a foundation, I believe that the most successful ecosystems out there are typically those that are very globally minded, that has a global talent base at a local level. To the point of Singapore, perfect example. A lot of international influence, right? And are a growing ecosystem and are developing really, really great businesses in that market. And so in the book, we actually coin a new term, which is basically an evolution of entrepreneurship. So we have basically a term called an entrepreneur, which is, if you can imagine a pyramid with 3 layers. At the bottom, for the past 15 to 20 years, people have talked about the agile mindset and entrepreneurial mindset. That has given way to organizations wanting to have that for digital transformation and innovation initiatives, what we then call a company mindset, where they can then apply that agile mindset within an organization, but then really be strong in being able to build coalition and buy-in internally to drive those initiatives. But the tip of the iceberg is a cultural mindset, a global mindedness that really allows organizations, if they bring in these talent that both have an agile mindset and a company mindset and a global mindset, being able to localize the business internationally. Because if you can imagine, you're someone that leads international for an organization that goes to, let's say, Indonesia, that person needs to be agile because he needs to understand how he can adapt that business model in an international market. But at the same time, he needs to be able to influence the organization at home at the initial market to get buy-in so you can do those needed localizations. And at the same time, he needs to have that culture mindset because he needs to navigate a global organization, his company, at the same time also being able to connect with the local ecosystem and culture. So really having these 3 overarching strands of skills are really, really important if you want to build a global organization. And I think for governments, when it comes to at least traditional economies, they need to promote this type of talent in different ways. One, through education, obviously, but also attracting global talent into the market. To the point of Denmark, very, very small country, we're terrible at that, even though we have international people in Denmark, but it's super hard to get in. It's super hard, even for my wife, to come to Denmark if I were to decide to go home. And that's a shame because I believe the best economies are those that attract the best talent and global talent as well. They can develop really, really strong entrepreneurial and innovation ecosystem because innovation does not come just through looking at one lens. You need to have multiple different types of perspectives, diversity, and so forth to look at a problem and really innovate as organizations. So it's global and international minded talent are really, really important.
Thank you for sharing that. And I think Iman, I'm so sorry, it's almost 5 a.m. You couldn't sleep on that. Thank you for very early morning to joining us. And Alan, thank you. And Rogelio, also thank you. And today we talk about global collaboration. And I wanted to keeping marching on it, how we connect very young or very brilliant idea-owned startup people. They work together and they find out the niche solution and helping the world better. Not only the digital transformation but the green transformation. but the problem is too far away. Even the Corona-19, they cannot travel each other, and they don't know each other. That's, I think, the big hurdle. So I hope we'll more closely work together and introduce different regions, different solutions, different people, and make something. I don't know what it'll be, but I definitely sure it can be help for the global all better life. Thank you for today, and this is our last the GIGF forum. Thank you.
감사합니다.